a large spherical character just comes busting out of a wall. You invented the Kool-Aid Man.
I did.
That's exactly what you've done.
My name is Jeff Irving, and this is the Vrahode Tavern Podcast. I am the creator of the Vrahode game system, and in this podcast, we're going to do a deep dive into the lore and gameplay of Vrahode. I'm joined by Brandon Rollins, who will be acting as a stand-in for you, asking many of the questions you might be curious about yourself. Brandon, what are we talking about today?
All right. So for today's topic, I was thinking, let's go ahead and conclude our 5-part series, which is a deep dive into the 10 crafted races of Vrahode. So we've covered the other 8 in the last 4 podcasts, so we've only got 2 more to do, and that is the Chorne and the Greenleng. And a little more information for anybody who's just catching up on these. There are 6 crafted races which you are able to play in the base game, and then there are 4 others that become playable as of the second expansion, and I actually don't know a whole lot about how these play myself. So with that in mind, where do you want to start?
Well, one thing I want to cover that we missed in the last episode, we've talked about where all these races come from, but we neglected to talk about where the Sahroon live. And so before we start our discussion about the Chorne and the Greenleng, I wanted to just real quickly mention where on the map in the overlands we find the Sahroon. And they are located in region 39, which is on the stormward side. It's an island chain on the stormward side of Rendur. And so because they spend their lives at sea and in the water, it only makes sense that their village of Stormhaven would be on an island chain. And so just wanted to cover that topic and apologize for missing describing that on our last podcast. So as far as our discussion of the Chorne and the Greenleng, I think it makes sense. We can either stick to script or we can start with the pre-gen heroes. What do you think, Brandon? What suits your fancy?
I think let's go ahead and read from the description at the back of the card and then get right into the pre-gen heroes.
Which do you want to do first, Chorne or Greenleng?
Let's go with the Chorne.
Okay. We have a large lore section at the beginning of the quest book in the core box, and we have a similar lore section in the book that comes with the second expansion. And you'll learn a lot more detail about the Chorne in that book. But this is on the back of their card. That'll be on the back of your heroes or custom hero cards about the race. So here we go. It says, some speculate that the Chorne cannot be counted in numbers the way other peoples are, for they are not, the thinking continues, the same as the rock they animate. They are a continuity of spirit which runs through Vrahode, and whether it is one spirit or many, no one can say. But when they awaken the pile of boulders, they do so only during times of greatest need. So that see that you are the one who needs them. So there's the description of the Chorne. So we've got this kind of, obviously the Chorne they're these hulking stone beings, collections of boulders, rocks, if you will. And they're very different. They're much larger than any of the other races as far as their bulk. They're perhaps not as tall as the Tyrell or the Minoc, but they're 2 or 3 times as wide. So that's what they look like in appearance. You want to do the pre-gen heroes at this point, you think?
Yeah, I think go right into the pre-gen heroes.
Okay, we only have one from the Chorne because they're not really as much about male female. They're just Chorne. So they're kind of neuter, if you will, as far as or androgynous, I think is a better way to say it. And we have one hero, and I say it looks kind of male to me, but his name is Bearden. He is a juggernaut. Okay. So what is a juggernaut? What is the role of a juggernaut? And so you have this hulking pile of boulders. It makes sense that the role of juggernaut would be well suited for someone like that. And Bearden fits that bill. He starts out with 62 life. So he starts out with a ton of life.
Oh my god. I mean, like the Mahari have like 12.
Well, no, but you got to remember, this is
Oh,
starting.
right. Second expansion.
Let's look at the life of the other heroes that are introduced in the second expansion so that we can compare it accurately. So let's go.
Okay.
Okay, so if we look at Olshaba, our marksman, she starts out at 59. Grotto, 59. Spling, 56. Jazu, 57, and Ajiti, 57. So he's got more life than any of the other heroes introduced in the second expansion. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
But now let's look at his movement. His movement is 5. Okay. So
yeah, that's not very far at all.
No, he is the slowest of all of the heroes. And I would say, as we look at this episode, as we look at the two heroes from from the Chorne race and from the Greenling race, what we're seeing here is the extremes. These are the extremes. This is the largest race in the Chorne and the smallest race in the Greenling. We're talking about something that is a living stone in the Chorne and something that's almost insect-like when we take a look at Spling or Greenling. And so they're very, very different. You play them extremely differently. You play them totally differently. So what we like to do is really push the boundaries of what's fun in a board game and what's doable without getting complex. And we've really done that with these two races and these heroes. So anyway, so as we look at him, we know he's got a lot of life. He's super slow. He starts out already with plate armor, over the stone. He's got a heavy 2-handed hammer. His skills are 2 in body and 1 in presence. So he's got one called Savage Blitz. So that's probably the mainstay of a Juggernaut, is the ability to do damage deep into enemy ranks instead of just on the front line. So a Juggernaut is going to have the ability to push through, to shoulder in, to do damage deeper. And so he's going to be the one to do that. And so if you're up against a big group of enemies, obviously the Juggernaut should be the first in to battle. First in, no question. He's got one called Volatile Strike. So he can take a big heavy weapon and he can hit an enemy in such a way that it does damage to them. It sends them airborne. And when they land, they go into a knockdown state because of the amount of damage and having flown through the air. So, if you can imagine when men and elves fought Sauron back in the original battle for Middle-earth, and you saw Sauron step up with this huge mace or flail, whatever it was he had, and begin to carve through the ranks of men and elves, he would swing it through them, and 3 or 4 or 5 of them would go flying back into the ranks. That's what this Volatile Strike does, but it only does it to one enemy. But he can lift an entire enemy and send them flying. Pretty cool. And then
Iron. Oh yeah, definitely. That's such a power move.
I know it. And then his present skill is called Iron Shoulder. And so basically what he's doing with this is he's dropping a shoulder and he's bull rushing. He's like blitzkrieging into the enemy ranks, and he's causing a line of knockdown and things like that, just havoc among the enemy ranks. And so some of these are going to be more about damage. Some of these abilities are going to be more about disrupting the positioning of a large force of enemies. And so he's, in a way, just through his brute force, kind of a crowd control guy too. And like I said, there's only one hero from this race that's stepped forward to fight. I will tell you that we see the Chorne earlier. We see them in the core box in Expansion 1. We actually have a summonable ally in a Chorne called Throm. Throm is summonable through a magic item device that we can find. And we can summon Throm to fight with us. So there is a Chorne that will fight with us during certain battles, and then he will leave. And then we also have Grolden, another Chorne that we'll run across Grolden as we explore the world. And he will, he's just kind of a lonely fellow out wandering the world, and he will join us and travel with us to a destination. And so he'll just kind of accompany us and make a leg of our travel safer because he's just wanting friendship. And so by the time we get to be able to play Bearden, the Chorne, as a hero, we're already pretty well introduced to and fond of this hulking race of stone beings.
Before we get into like abilities and restrictions, I think it's interesting to point out here, as you had mentioned in, I don't even know what episode at this point, the Chorn, one of the things that they do just in general is that they can create balacombs, which are like these historical records, right?
Yes, a balacomb is a history stone. And so
Mhm.
basically, in the description of the Chorn, speaking of them kind of as like a collective that exists within the stones of the world of Vrahode, they sometimes they grow weary of the road. Like for example, Grolden, this Chorn that we find sometimes as we travel, he may decide at one point he's just tired of the road, and he'll turn himself into a balacomb, and it's just a form of rest. And the other reason that Chorn will choose to become a balacomb is to protect very important historical information. So, not to give away too many spoilers, but there is at least one balacomb in existence in the world of Vrahode, and I will tell you that it's with pretty high level of certainty that that balacomb was formed or created by a Chorn in order to protect some very important information. And so finding out that information will help us know more and move the story forward. It's one of the exciting turning points of our story. So I'll be excited for you guys to find maybe find out what happens with that balacomb.
Does this tie back into them as a playable race?
That's all I'm going to say at this point, because I'm really bad about, like, I'm good at keeping secrets, but I'm bad about like accidentally letting them go, like say, oh man, I didn't mean to say that kind of thing,
Mhm.
So I will stop there.
We will actually leave it alone then. Yeah, so I guess moving on. What kind
Let's talk
of?
about where they live.
Yeah, let's talk about where they live.
The main island of Rendur on Vrahode is the main continent, and we've got the Kautuk that live there. We've got the Athakul. We've got the Drelrune. The Tyrell live there, and so the race that lives probably the most iceward on Rendur is the Chorne, and so they're the ones to the far right of the map, or the farthest right, I should say. And they live in the Shadowed Peaks in region 264 in a village called Rockroot. And so to visit the Chorne, you have to travel to a mountaintop, because their village is on the very top of a mountain. Oftentimes, based on inversions and things, it's above the clouds. And so, you don't take lightly going to travel to see the Chorne, but that is where they live. There is plenty to do in and around the village of Rockroot. There's lots of commissions to do in the mountains there to help the Chorne in certain ways. We can talk about that more later. But yeah, that's where they live. So on the main island of Rendur, but on the iceward end.
So, what kind of traits do they have?
Okay, so again, one of the things we talked about is that these races that we're talking about today are extremes.
Mhm.
The Chorne, their racial restrictions are many. They may not dual wield. They're too slow moving and just lumbering to manage two weapons, one in each hand. So they can only single wield a weapon. They can only use long or heavy weapons. They cannot use, their hands don't even work to grasp and manipulate a dagger or a hand axe. They need something big to grasp a hold of. So a lot of times you'll see a Chorne using a big two-handed axe or two-handed hammer. Let's see what else. Oh, and they can't do any ranged physical attacks. They just don't have the dexterity or the eye to hand coordination to move quickly enough to. I mean, they can't pull a bowstring. Their hands are like hams. They just have. So they have to have big, heavy weapons. And that's and no range. They can't throw anything. They're going to be melee only. Melee only. So if I was going to be creating a custom Chorne hero, I would not be creating a caster.
Yeah, no, that doesn't seem like it would be a good fit.
No, I think the best thing you can do if you don't want to play a juggernaut is any other melee role would probably be the best because they have to stay toe to toe and they have to use big stuff. So yeah, that's really what they're suited for.
And to that end, do they have any other restrictions?
No, just like I said, just only long or heavy. No. I mean, obviously they can put on whatever armor they want.
I bet their abilities are killer.
Well, let's talk about their racial traits first.
Okay.
They're immune to bleed effects, and it only makes sense, right? You can't make them bleed because they're stone. In the mountains, when we enter mountain regions as any of the races other than Chorne, it costs us 2 movement points to move. To fatigue. It's very fatiguing for the races to travel in mountains because of the verticality and the difficulty of the terrain, but not the Chorne. They're essentially at one with the stone of the mountain. And so it only costs them 1 fatigue per mountain region that they move through. Okay. The last racial trait of the Chorne is that they have +2 mitigation, period.
Oh my gosh, these guys are defensive tanks.
That's it. They have +2 mitigation wearing nothing. Okay, so you're starting out with this bulwark. Granted, there's tons of restrictions on them. There's only certain things you're going to be able to do. No ranged, can't do ranged physical attacks. Now, I will say this: you could do a mage Chorne because their racial restriction says no ranged physical attacks. That doesn't mean you can't cast lightning and things that are spells that work at a distance. So to me, a Chorne mage might be a really cool build.
Yeah, it's like, because normally you would think of a mage as being kind of squishy, easy to kill. But if they're like a defensive tank and you can keep them at a distance and have them as a mage, I mean, that would be like a monstrously tough thing to try and fight.
The problem is this with the Chorne, okay? They start out with +2 mitigation, right? And their movement is only 5. If a Chorne is wearing heavy banded mail, that's 1 more minus to their movement. Now they're down to 4. If they're wearing any plate armor at all, they're down to 3. And if they wear the top tier plate armor, they're down to 2. So a mage can't afford to be that immobile, right? A mage has got to be able to move around. And so you can see that this particular race and this particular role is very well matched together. Juggernaut, Chorne, they belong together.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I've kept you waiting long enough, and I will tell you what the racial abilities of the Chorne are. The first,
hit me.
Okay, and remember, we're trying to match these racial abilities with the race. The first racial ability we have is called Tectonic Wave. So we're gonna make a wave of earth that causes 2 damage and knockdown to enemies in a line, orthogonal or diagonal, up to 4 spaces away. Damage may not be mitigated.
Good grief.
Okay, so I've got a line 4 spaces long, orthogonal or diagonal. It's only doing 2 damage to them, but it's knocking them down. And so now they're all prone, and so their mitigation goes down 1. So they've got to waste an action and stand back up before they regain that lost mitigation and can do battle again. So I'm a disruptor at this point. I'm just literally casting a line and knocking everything down and giving them a couple points of damage. And so I'm acting as this complete just juggernaut. I'm just destroying the battlefield.
Oh yeah, and if you've got a Chorne with a low initiative roll and a large party,
Yep.
And that means they get to go early, first or maybe second, like it's ridiculous.
Now get ready for this second one. This one's going to knock you for a loop. Okay, think about the Chorne. They're hulking, they're slow, but they're part of a collective of souls that inhabits the stone of the world of Vrahode. So their second racial ability is called Metamorphic Soul. And this hero may move from the current space to any other unoccupied space on this encounter map at the beginning of their next turn, then take normal actions.
Hold on. Is that basically a teleport?
It's a teleport.
Oh my God.
So they can dissolve into the stone, move to any unoccupied square on the battlefield, reform their body up out of the ground. And then, because it takes an entire round for that to happen, basically when I cast Metamorphic Soul, it wastes my turn. I do nothing that turn. But the next turn, I get to rise up anywhere on the battlefield I want and then do my normal actions.
Oh,
So
that's scary because like you have no idea where it's going to pop up, and it doesn't matter where you move, you could be
nope.
at risk.
Exactly. And so it's like it totally flips the model of the slow moving Chorne on its head, because its soul can dissolve down into the ground, into the rock, move, and then reform and grow up into a new Chorne.
So does that cost a lot of rule or something?
It's a racial ability.
Oh my God. So it doesn't even cost rule.
Costs none.
Oh, that's nuts.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I love it. Yeah. And I mean, if I'm going to play a Chorne, that's probably why I'm going to play it, is because of that racial ability.
I was going to say, it's like that's probably your justification for a custom hero build of a Chorne.
Yeah, because, I mean, how many times do you want to get behind the enemy ranks, right? That does it. Boom. Now, granted, it wastes a turn. It's slow, just like the Chorne is. He has to waste a turn to do it. But then he comes up and does normal actions. I mean, that is just brilliant.
A large spherical character just comes busting out of a wall. You invented the Kool-Aid Man.
I did.
That's exactly what you've done.
Kool-Aid. That's so funny.
Just, oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what you've done.
All right. Well, let's read the description for the Greenling. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, little is known of the Greenling, and even less is understood. They are believed to live in large groups among the trees and swamps, almost hive-like. Many have said, though few now travel in these dark places, and fewer come back from them. But of this race, this much is known with certainty. They are strongest when they are greatest in their numbers. Their enemies should be so advised. Overlook them to your peril. Okay, so what does that tell you? That tells you that they're reclusive, like most of the races are, that they live in swamps and dark places, and that they're stronger in numbers, right? So probably weaker individually, maybe. Sounds right. So with that description, let's talk about the pregen Greenling. And this is going to give you a lot better idea of the Greenling culture. So we have one hero, and where Bearden is kind of seems male, but the Chorne are kind of asexual, if you will, whatever, neuter. The Greenling society is completely dominated by females. We don't see males. Males live to serve the females of the Greenling race. They are extremely diminutive. They're between about a foot or 2 feet. They're tiny. Okay? And our hero from the Greenling race, her name is Spling. And her role in the group is she is a nature priest. Why do we care about a nature priest? Well, she wears simple studded armor. She has a serpentine dagger, and she has an apothecary kit. Remember that. It's important. Okay, when we look at her life as compared to the others, Bearden starts with 62 life. She starts with 56. So way less life. Bearden starts, his movement is 5. Spling's movement is 8. Okay? So her skills, she has 2 in spirit and 1 in mind. Her spirit skills are nature's absolution, favor of the wilds, and her mind skill is called nature's accord. Her role restrictions are she can wear fancy studded armor or less. So leather or less. She's going to stay light and fly around. The difference between Spling and Grendlem and Drista is that the Athakul are short flyers. The Greenling are permaflyers. What distinguishes a permaflyer from a short flyer, like the Athakul, she can remain aloft at the end of her turn. She can attack from a flight height. She does not have to land. And when she is at flight height, she is immune to melee attacks.
That's kind of huge in and of its own self. Yeah, like
it's huge. It's huge. It's quite huge. Permaflying is really great, especially if you have a ranged attack. Now, you're vulnerable to ranged attacks. You're vulnerable to anything ranged, but she's able to fly above the battlefield and remain there. Her skills are really more utilitarian for a group. I'm not sure I could make it very far playing a Nature Priest solo in the game. I'm sure I could, but it would be a challenge. Their ability to fly above things is huge, but her skills are focused on getting the most from the land. In other words, she can go into a region and she can use her skill. I believe it's Favor of the Wilds. And when she uses Favor of the Wilds, she can literally locate the desired regional item that she's looking for. In other words, the plant or root or seed pod or mold that she's wanting. She can just use that skill and find it automatically. She doesn't have to fight tons of monsters to get it. And let me tell you that when you have people in your party that are suffering from horrible afflictions that is decimating their skills, their roles, and you're traveling to try to find a cure for it, if you have Spling with you and you know the cure for a given ailment comes from a region type, you go into that region type, she uses the skill Favor of the Wilds, and she gets your cure for you. Gone. Your affliction is cured. Okay, that's important.
Oh, that's handy.
Because again, the world of Vrahode has 3 enemy types: the world, your inventory, and flesh and blood enemies. And she's going to mitigate some of those, the teeth in some of those enemies because of her ability to find things on demand. Another thing, she has an ability called Nature's Accord, which basically says that she can use her apothecary kit to attempt to create a potion, to generate a potion whenever she uses her skill, and she's going to make she's going to roll off of a table to try to generate a potion. But potions, when you generate them, the nice thing about them is they stay with you. You can use them when you need them. And so she's able to generate these potions as she travels around the world and give them to her party mates. And everybody's got the potions that they need. And so she's a resource for all those potions. And then if she does the right roll on her skill, she can actually make the exact potion she wants. She can't do it automatically, but if she gets within like 1 point of the number she says she's going to roll, she can actually make the potion on demand that she wants. So it's a very potent skill, and you can kind of see how the Greenling race works. They're in league with the plants and vines that they were created from. Their magic comes from the plants and vines and things, the small plants of the world, and the insects. That's kind of what the Greenling race was crafted from: insects, plants and vines, and that's why the race exists.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile to point out again that I think you had mentioned a long time ago that the Akorish just kind of created races out of whatever was already existing in the world of Vrahode, right?
That's why there's 3 reptile races. There was a healthy diversity of reptiles on Vrahode, and they went around to different parts of the world and imbued animals and kind of combined an animal with a human-like soul to craft a new race. You know, their magic tends to be combinative. The Akorish's magic tends to be kind of combinative, powerful. And that's the way the Greenling came about. Was they saw the insects and that area of the world, they crafted that and they imbued it with sentience, and look what happened. You know, you got the Greenling. Let's talk about racial restrictions though. Obviously no longer heavy weapons, right? We're talking about 1 foot to 2 foot tall beings, no longer heavy.
Yeah, they're not going to be carrying around like your heavy battle axes.
Important thing about the Greenling is they are immune to poison. Come on, that's great.
Oh yeah, that's really useful.
Let's talk about the fact that they're a permaflyer. I mean, that's huge, right? Permaflyer. Stay aloft.
Like that's probably like reason number one why you would choose them as your custom hero.
And let's look at their racial abilities, shall we? Okay, so their first racial ability is called Infectious Wounds. It adds poison effect to successful ranged attack. So these guys are used to using little like blowguns and darts and small ranged weapons, right? And so they're going to add poison to their ranged attack.
That's really good if you're in a long, drawn-out battle, too.
Yep, you can just hit them from a distance and let them get poisoned over time. The other thing that's neat is because the Greenling are stronger in numbers, their second racial ability, is called Hive Might. And so what it does is it adds +1 to mind skill rolls for this hero for each additional party member this battle. So let's say Spling is in your party and there's 4 of you. She gets +3 because there's 3 other people in her party to her mind rolls if she uses that Hive Might ability.
+3 to which rolls exactly?
Her mind rolls.
Okay, because that's where a lot of her skills are based. That's like right. That's a big modifier.
Spling is primarily spirit, secondarily mind. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so if you had, let's say you chose to be a Greenling mage or a Greenling spark, think about how potent a Greenling spark would be with the ability to give her +3 to cast her spells.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's a big deal.
That's a big addition.
Yep. So they're very potent in magic. They're very weak physically. You're not going to see a Greenling on the front lines. You're just not.
No, physically weak, but extremely mobile, very powerful mind skills.
Yep. Now, keep in mind, she's got to kind of waste a turn in order to acquire that help from her friends, right? She's got to kind of pull that source and waste a turn with that racial ability. But once she's done that +3 to her rolls lasts the entire battle.
Mm-hmm.
So she's only got to do that once.
Yeah, if you're up against a lot of enemies, that could be really, really, really helpful.
Yeah. So
especially when you start stacking that on top of poison effects too.
Yep. I really like the Greenling. I like the fact that they're the complete opposite of the Chorne. I mean, they're night and day, you know?
Mm-hmm. When do you think you might use a Greenling in a custom hero build?
Okay, so let's look at it. We got Permaflyer. So we've got the ability to stay away from melee, but obviously we're vulnerable to ranged attacks at that point. You know, things are going to try to shoot us out of the air. And the way you have to look at that too, Permaflyers, when they get shot in the air, there's a special set of rules to handle Permaflyers. If someone attacks you while you're flying with a physical object, whether it be an arrow, a dagger, a spear, or a hand axe, or anything like that, any thrown weapon, you cannot then attack from the air anymore. You have to land down to fight height, remove that weapon, and then you can resume normal activity. So the rules around Permaflyers is that they can attack from the air. Okay, short flyers cannot. Short flyers, basically they fly, they move, they land, then they can attack. But they're on the ground when they attack. Permaflyers can remain flying even at the end of their turn, and they can launch an attack, a ranged attack from flight height and stay there. That's a big difference. That changes everything. So yeah, I think that's huge. And then if I'm doing a custom build of a Greenling, I like the idea that I'm adding poison to ranged attacks because, again, I want to stay at range. I want to stay flying. And if I can add a poison effect to a ranged attack, that just makes me that much more potent from the air.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and that's like That's something you wouldn't normally associate with a range attack, too, is poison.
How about this for a build? How about this? How about an oracle or an arbiter build? Okay, so we know that the orator is no, I'm sorry, oracle, not orator. The oracle build, which is Shiroku is the arbiter and Harna is the oracle. Those two roles. One of them is spirit heavy with a secondary mind, and one of them is mind heavy with a secondary spirit. I would say either one of those would be my preferred build for a Greenling because you're able to not only do direct damage from a distance, but also flying. But then you also have the ability to heal your friends in battle while you're flying. That's the difference of a permaflyer, is that you can do it from the air, which means you can probably get in closer in some battles when the enemies don't have a ranged attack and basically heal your friends from above.
Ooh, that would make you a very good party member.
No, I think the Greenling is like the ultimate best way to finish out a party.
So I guess on that note, because like we've covered all of the crafted races at this point. If you're making like an ideal party for a 4-player game, what do you want on your team?
4 players?
Mm-hmm.
All right, with 4, I've got to have a blade. I've got to have my standard fight, warrior with access to the body deck. Okay, and this is going to be pre-expansion too. I'm just going to say core box, ultimate 4-player group. In the core box, I'm going to say I want a blade, I want a spark. Let's see, do I want a spark? No, I want a blade, I want a shadow, I want a blade, a shadow, I want an augur, which is my Kinezra, my Minot guy. And then the last one I need has got to be mage first and then spirit. So oracle. Yeah, oracle, augur, blade, shadow. That's my ultimate 4-player prior to the expansions.
What's your logic?
Okay, I've got to have my tank, damage output but durable. That's the blade. My shadow is going to help me for the situations that are tough anywhere underground. I'm going to be able to unlock stuff. I'm going to be able to pick locks. I'm going to be able to disarm traps. That's really important because when you get into the underlands, if you don't have a shadow, sorry, you're going to be hitting a lot of traps and you're going to be bashing a lot of doors, which creates a lot of noise, which in turn draws wandering monsters. So I love the shadow for the versatility. I love Kinezra and I love his off-tank healing ability. So we've got a little bit more of a healer there. And then I love the fact that Harna, the Oracle, is going to bring in primarily our mage capacity with a little bit more healing. So I've kind of got 2 weak healers instead of 1 strong one. I've got, that's my ideal. Now, if you want to talk to me about after a 4-party build after expansion 2 or starting in expansion 2, I'm going to switch out the blade for the Slayer because I want that critical strike ability. Or I could also trade out the blade for the weapons master. The one weak part about my ideal party is ranged physical attacks, and so I might want to trade out Kinezra for Ulshaba and get that marksman in there. Because she's going to hit farther and with more damage, and so I might swap out Kinezra for Ulshaba there. I don't know. I mean, I think you start going once you go beyond that 4 base party and you start going up into like 5 and 6. That's where I'm going to bring in Spling, or I'm going to bring in the Juggernaut, maybe, or even a lore master. I mean, the idea that the bigger the party gets, the more often enemies are going to have behaviors, because the behaviors is kind of a scaling mechanism in the game. Having someone who can disarm enemy behaviors or neutralize them is going to become really important. So don't discount the lore master in a big group either.
And I feel like one of the good things is that there's no like objective best party. You just kind of mix and match and combine based on your preferences and the play style of the folks that you're working with.
Well, and quickly, as you start to get meaningful hero advancements, which in our game system, the way you get meaningful hero advancements is by either doing quests, playing through the campaign, or procedurally, you get meaningful hero advancements through doing what we call commissions. And commissions are mini quests that are done in and around villages. And so if you want to gain the trust of the locals, you do commissions for them. And at the end of each tier of commissions is when you get those meaningful hero advancements. And so in the core box, you're offered 3 tiers of commissions in each of the 6 starting villages. And then in expansion 1, you get tier 4 commissions in each of those 6 starting villages. And then when we start with expansion 2, you get tier 5 commissions in all 10 of the crafted race villages then. And then in the 3rd expansion, you get tier 6 of all 10 of the starting villages that are then available to you. And so you can get meaningful hero advancements numerous ways in our game system, and it's very satisfying. So like if you're playing if you're questing for advancement or you're campaigning for advancement, you can't come into the commission system and get those meaningful hero advancements. Instead, you'll be rewarded with a nice item or something, but you will not get that. You cannot double dip on advancement, or you'll find that your heroes are overpowered and you'll find that the challenge level is not satisfying for you. And so we do that in order to prevent you from becoming just extremely overpowered.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. So with that in mind, is there anything else you want to mention about these two?
Let's see. If we talk about the Chorne and the Greenleng, I mean, they're coming late game, right? We're a little bit over halfway through the story arc when we see these two. This is when, you know, all the races are trying to put forth their greatest heroes to help us defend Vrahode from, you know, destruction. And it would be lovely to think that a group of 3 heroes that had been playing the game would find a couple friends to help them make the final push and play through the 2nd expansion and then the final 3rd expansion. And that would be really when you would want to see the Greenleng and or the Chorne come into play and be added to a party, because what they bring is just it's potent. You know, you've either got this flying repository of magic and healing that has almost no life, or you have this just rolling boulder of death and destruction that you can call upon. And what a fun way to add new people to a party, right? To come in and get to play those roles would be great. So that's all I would say. That's all I would say really about the Greenleng and the Chorne. But I will say this: what I would like to do, Brandon, and it won't happen until I won't be able to do it until I get back from Gen Con, but I would like to record a podcast that covers the rest of the races of Vrahode, the ones that aren't crafted. Let's talk about the Akurish. Let's talk about the Barajadim. Let's talk about the Quayon. Let's talk about the Priol that are no longer on Vrahode but have left remnants behind that we still run into. Let's talk about those and maybe try to do it all in one episode.
Oh, that could be good.
Okay, well, let's try it. When I get back from Gen Con and when you have time, let's do it.
All right, that sounds good.
Awesome.
In the meantime, you want to go ahead and take us out on this one?
No, I sure will. Thank you for listening to the Vrahode Tavern podcast. If you've enjoyed this show, take a moment and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It helps more than you know. You can learn more about Vrahode on vrahode.com. That's VRAHODE.com. Link in the show notes. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're at Vrahode. Thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. And keep an eye out for our next episode in 2 weeks.